Every time I cried, he would drag me to the mirror and tell me that even tears made my face uglier. But one day I brought him a photo, a DNA test proving that he himself was the mistake. The bathroom mirror in our house became my personal hell from the age of 6. That's when it all started. I remember the first time clearly because it was right after I had accidentally knocked over his coffee mug while trying to reach for cereal on the kitchen counter. The brown liquid spread across his morning newspaper, and his face turned this shade of red that I would come to know so well over the years. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to leave marks but firm enough that I knew I was in trouble. He marched me straight to that bathroom, flicked on the harsh fluorescent light, and positioned me right in front of the mirror. I was still sniffling from the shock of making him angry, wiping my nose with the back of my small hand. "Look at yourself," he said, his voice cold and measured. "Just look. You see that face? That's what happens when someone makes mistakes they can't fix. Your mother should have been more careful about who she spent time with." I didn't understand what he meant then. I was 6. All I knew was that my reflection looked back at me with red, puffy eyes and a runny nose, and somehow that was wrong. Somehow that made me wrong. This became our routine. Any time I showed emotion, any time I did something that disappointed him, any time I simply existed in a way that seemed to irritate him, he would take me to that mirror. The worst part wasn't even the words he said. It was the way he said them, like he was stating scientific facts. Like he was a researcher documenting the behavior of some unfortunate specimen. By the time I was 8, I had learned to cry silently. By 10, I had learned not to cry at all in front of him. But somehow, he always found reasons to take me to that mirror anyway. "You walk like you're ashamed of yourself," he would say. "Good. You should be. Your mother looks at you sometimes like she wishes she could take it all back." I don't blame her. That face of yours tells the whole story. Anyone with eyes can see you don't belong in this family. The mirror sessions weren't daily, but they were frequent enough that I started avoiding my own reflection everywhere else. I would brush my teeth looking down at the sink. I would comb my hair by feel. When I caught glimpses of myself in store windows or car mirrors, I would immediately look away, hearing his voice echo in my head. School became my escape, but even there I struggled. Teachers would call on me, and I would mumble my answers, keeping my head down. Other kids seemed so confident, so sure of their place in the world. I envied them their easy laughter, their ability to look people in the eye, their complete lack of awareness that they might be mistakes that needed fixing. I made a few friends over the years, but I never invited them over. The thought of them witnessing one of his mirror sessions filled me with a dread so deep it made my stomach hurt. What if they agreed with him? What if they looked at me and saw exactly what he saw? When I turned 13, something shifted. Maybe it was hormones, maybe it was just the natural rebelliousness that comes with being a teenager, but I started paying attention to his words differently. Before, I had simply absorbed them like a sponge absorbs water. Now, I began to analyze them. He would say things like, "Your real father probably doesn't even know you exist," or "I bet your mother wishes she could go back and make different choices." The implications were always there, hovering just beneath the surface of his direct insults. He was telling me I wasn't his son without actually saying it. The more I thought about it, the more certain pieces of my childhood started making sense. The way he never came to school events. The way he would introduce me to his friends with just my name, never as his son. The way my mother would get this tight, nervous look on her face whenever people commented on how I didn't look like him. I started paying attention to other things too. Like how he had no baby pictures of me in his wallet, while his friends all carried photos of their kids. Like how he never told stories about the day I was born, while my friends' parents seemed to have endless tales about their children's arrivals into the world. By 15, I was spending most of my time in my room or at the library, anywhere but in the common areas of our house where I might encounter him. My mother tried to bridge the gap sometimes, suggesting family activities or asking why we didn't spend time together anymore. But how could I explain that every interaction with him felt like being slowly poisoned? The mirror sessions continued, though less frequently as I got older and became better at avoiding situations that might trigger them. When they did happen, I had developed a technique of focusing on a spot just over my own shoulder in the reflection, so it looked like I was looking at myself while actually avoiding my own eyes. High school brought new challenges. Dating was completely out of the question. How could I bring a girl home to meet someone who spent years telling me I was a genetic disappointment? How could I trust that someone might actually want to be with me when the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally had made it clear that I was fundamentally flawed? I threw myself into my studies instead. Books became my companions. Academic achievement became my drug of choice. If I couldn't be the son he wanted, Maybe I could at least be successful enough that his opinion of me wouldn't matter. But late at night, alone in my room, I would sometimes catch my reflection in my bedroom window and hear his voice as clearly as if he were standing right behind me. The poison had gotten deep into my system by then. I believed him. I believed that something was fundamentally wrong with me, that I was carrying some kind of genetic shame that marked me as different, lesser, unwanted. The breaking point came during my junior year. I had been accepted into several advanced classes, and my grades were excellent. I was proud of myself for the first time in years. I made the mistake of sharing this good news at dinner. He looked at me across the table, chewed his food slowly, and then said something that hit me like a physical blow. Well, I guess even mistakes can sometimes stumble into doing something right by accident. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and made a decision that would change everything. I was tired of wondering. I was tired of carrying around this weight of uncertainty and shame. I wanted to know the truth, whatever it was. I had learned about DNA testing in my biology class. The science fascinated me, but more than that, it represented something I had never had before, the possibility of concrete answers. No more wondering, no more guessing, no more living in the gray area of maybe. It took me 2 months to save up the money from my part-time job at a local grocery store. I told my mother I was saving for a new laptop for college applications. Every dollar I earned from bagging groceries and collecting shopping carts went into a shoebox under my bed. When I finally had enough, I ordered the test online and had it shipped to my friend's house. The collection process was simple, just a cheek swab, but sitting in my friend's bedroom following the instructions felt like the most important moment of my life up to that point. The waiting period was torture. 3 to 4 weeks, they said. I counted every day. I checked the website obsessively. I imagined every possible outcome and how I would handle it. If the test confirmed he was my biological father, I would have to find a way to live with the fact that someone who shared my DNA could treat me with such cruelty. If it confirmed he wasn't, I would have to figure out what that meant for my identity, my family, my entire understanding of who I was. Update 1. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for school. I saw it on my phone and my hands started shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen to open it. The subject line was simple: your DNA results are ready. I couldn't open it at home. I couldn't risk him seeing my reaction, whatever it might be. I stuffed my phone in my backpack and somehow made it through my morning classes, though I couldn't tell you what any of my teachers talked about that day. During lunch period, I found an empty classroom and finally opened the email. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I clicked the link, entered my password, and there it was. Black text on a white screen. Scientific and absolute. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. 0%. Not his son. Not his biological child. Everything he had said, every cruel word, every mirror session, every moment of making me feel like a genetic disappointment, it was all based on something that was actually true, but not in the way either of us had thought. I wasn't his mistake. I was someone else's child entirely. The relief was overwhelming at first. All those years of wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't earn his love, why I felt like I didn't fit. It all made sense now. There was nothing wrong with me. I was just in the wrong family. But the relief was quickly followed by a tsunami of other emotions. Anger at my mother for letting me suffer through years of psychological abuse while she knew the truth. Confusion about who my real father was. Fear about what would happen when this information came out. I printed the results at the library after school. The paper felt heavy in my hands as I walked home, like it contained the weight of 17 years of lies and half-truths and carefully avoided conversations. That evening, I sat in my room staring at the printed results for hours. I kept thinking about all the times he had told me I didn't belong, all the times he had made me look at my reflection and feel ashamed of what I saw. He had been right about me not being his son, but wrong about everything else. I wasn't a mistake. I was just a secret. The next few days were surreal. I went through the motions of normal life, school, homework, work at the grocery store, but everything felt different. I would look at him across the dinner table and think about the piece of paper hidden in my desk drawer. I would watch my mother bustling around the kitchen and wonder how long she had been carrying this secret. I started noticing things I had missed before. The way she would change the subject whenever people commented on family resemblances. The way she would get nervous when he made his cruel comments about my appearance or behavior. The way she sometimes looked at me with what I now recognized as guilt rather than the disappointment I had always assumed it was. I also started thinking about my real father, whoever he was. Did he know I existed? Did he wonder about me? Was he someone my mother had loved, or was I the result of something more complicated? Did I have half-siblings somewhere who might actually want to know me? For a week, I carried the test results around like a loaded weapon, not sure when or how to use them. Part of me wanted to confront my mother first, to give her a chance to explain before I dropped this bomb on the family. But another part of me wanted him to know first, wanted to see his face when he realized that all his cruelty had been based on a truth he didn't even know. The decision was made for me on a Sunday morning. I had slept in, which was unusual for me, and when I came downstairs for breakfast he was already in one of his moods. Maybe he had a bad night. Maybe something had happened at work that week. Maybe he was just feeling particularly cruel. Whatever the reason, he took one look at me in my pajamas and messy hair and started in. Look at you. 17 years old, and you still can't even be bothered to make yourself presentable for breakfast. Your mother works hard to put food on this table, and you can't even show her the respect of getting dressed. I should have just apologized and gone upstairs to change clothes. That's what the old me would have done. But something about having that test result in my possession made me feel different. Stronger. Less willing to absorb his poison without fighting back. I said something I had never said before. I told him I was tired of his constant criticism. I told him that nothing I ever did seemed to be good enough for him. I told him that I was sick of feeling like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. His face went through several color changes as I spoke. When I finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Then he stood up from the breakfast table, grabbed my arm, and started dragging me toward the bathroom. Time for you to remember exactly what you are, he said. Clearly, you've forgotten. But this time, as he positioned me in front of that familiar mirror, something inside me snapped. I reached into my pajama pocket, pulled out the folded test results, and handed them to him. I said the words I had been rehearsing in my head for days. You're right. I'm not your son. Here's the proof. Update 2. The silence in that bathroom stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. He unfolded the paper slowly, his eyes scanning the scientific language and percentages. I watched his face in the mirror as he read, saw the exact moment when the meaning hit him. His reflection went completely white, then flushed red, then white again. His hands started shaking slightly as he held the paper. For the first time in my 17 years of knowing him, he seemed completely at a loss for words. I had imagined this moment so many times, had pictured him exploding with rage or denial or blame. But what actually happened was worse in a way. He just stood there, staring at the paper, looking like someone who had just realized that his entire understanding of reality was wrong. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and strange. Where did you get this? I told him about saving the money, about ordering the test, about weeks of waiting for results. As I talked, I could see him processing not just the information but the implications. I hadn't just discovered that he wasn't my father. I had actively sought out this information. I had been suspicious enough to investigate. I had been living with doubts about our relationship for long enough to take action. He set the paper down on the bathroom counter and walked out without saying another word. I heard his footsteps going down the hallway, heard the front door open and close, heard his car start in the driveway. He didn't come home that night. My mother found me in the kitchen the next morning, still wearing my pajamas from the day before, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. She took one look at my face and asked what had happened. I handed her the same piece of paper I had given him, watched her face go through the same series of expressions. But her reaction was different. Instead of shock or denial, what I saw was something that looked almost like relief. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table and started talking. Not the careful, measured way she usually spoke around difficult topics, but like someone who had been holding her breath for 17 years and could finally exhale. She told me about meeting my real father when she was 22. She had been working at a small accounting firm, and he was a client who came in regularly. He was married, she said, but separated from his wife and in the process of divorce. Or at least, that's what he told her. They had dated for about 6 months. She thought she was in love. She thought he was going to leave his wife, and they would build a life together. When she found out she was pregnant, she was initially happy, thinking it would bring them closer together. Instead, he disappeared. Stopped returning her calls, stopped coming to the office, vanished completely from her life. She later found out through mutual acquaintances that he had reconciled with his wife and moved to another state. She was 23, pregnant, and alone. That's when she met the man I had always called my father. He was kind to her initially, seemed to understand her situation, offered to help. They married quickly, and I was born a few months later. She said she thought he truly wanted to be my father at first. But as I got older and it became more obvious that I didn't look like him, he became suspicious. He would make comments, ask questions, accuse her of lying about the timeline of our relationship. She always denied it, terrified of what would happen if he knew the truth. The cruelty toward me started when I was old enough to understand language, but too young to understand what was really happening. She said she tried to protect me, tried to intervene, but he was clever about it. He never left marks, never did anything that could be easily reported or proven. And she was financially dependent on him, with no family support and limited job skills. As she talked, I felt my anger toward her shifting and changing. Part of me was furious that she had let me suffer for so many years while she knew the truth. But another part of me understood that she had been trapped in an impossible situation, trying to survive and protect me in the only way she knew how. When she finished talking, we sat in silence for a while. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. What do you want to do now? I didn't have an answer. The man who had raised me wasn't my father and had spent years making me feel like a mistake. My real father was someone who had abandoned my mother when she needed him most. My mother had lived with this secret for 17 years, watching me suffer and feeling helpless to stop it. He didn't come home the second night either, or the third. My mother called his work and was told he had requested emergency leave. She called his friends, but no one had heard from him. She even called his brother in another state, but he hadn't been in contact either. On the fourth day, I made a decision. I asked my mother for everything she remembered about my biological father. His full name, where he had worked, what city he had moved to, any details that might help me find him. She was reluctant at first. What if he didn't want contact? What if he had built a new life and didn't want reminders of his past mistakes? What if he rejected me the same way the man who raised me had? But I explained that I needed to know. I had spent 17 years feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, like I was some kind of genetic aberration that couldn't earn love or acceptance. Now I knew that at least half of that equation was wrong. Maybe my biological father was a terrible person who would want nothing to do with me. But maybe he wasn't. Maybe he had spent the last 17 years wondering about me too. She gave me what information she had, and I started searching online. Social media, professional directories, public records, anything that might give me a clue about where he was now. It took 3 days, but I found him. He was living about 2 hours away, working as a regional manager for a construction company. He had stayed married to his first wife, and they had 2 children together, my half-siblings. I stared at his profile picture for a long time. He looked like me. Not exactly, but there were unmistakable similarities in the shape of our faces, the way we smiled, even the way we held our heads. For the first time in my life, I was looking at someone who shared my DNA and feeling recognition instead of shame. I spent a week composing and recomposing a message to him. How do you contact someone to tell them they have a 17-year-old son they never knew existed? How do you explain 17 years of absence in a Facebook message? Finally, I kept it simple. I told him my name, my mother's name, and the dates that lined up with when they had dated. I told him I had reason to believe he was my biological father and that I would like to talk with him if he was open to it. I included my phone number and said he could contact me whenever he was ready. I sent the message on a Sunday evening and then spent the next 24 hours checking my phone every few minutes. He called the next day. Final update. His voice on the phone was nervous but kind. He said he had been staring at my message since the night before, trying to figure out how to respond. He remembered my mother clearly, he said. He had thought about her often over the years, wondered what had happened to her, felt guilty about the way he had handled their relationship. He had never known she was pregnant. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had spent years imagining that my biological father was someone who had known about me and chosen not to be involved. The reality was more complicated and, in some ways, more painful. He hadn't abandoned me. He had never even known I existed. We talked for 2 hours that first phone call. He told me about his life, his family, his work. He asked about me, about school, about my interests and plans for the future. The conversation felt surprisingly natural, like talking to someone I had known for years rather than a complete stranger. He also told me something that changed my entire perspective on the man who had raised me. He said that when he and my mother were dating, she had mentioned being in a previous relationship with someone who had been controlling and emotionally abusive. Someone who had made her feel worthless and stupid, who had convinced her that she couldn't make it on her own. The timeline matched up. My mother had been involved with the man I called my father before she met my biological father. Their relationship had been toxic from the beginning, but she had been young and insecure and hadn't known how to leave. When she got pregnant by my biological father and he disappeared, she had gone back to the only person she thought would take her in. He had married her not out of love or kindness, but because he enjoyed having power over her. And when I came along, I became another target for that need to control and diminish. My biological father wanted to meet in person. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our two cities. I was terrified and excited and nauseous all at the same time. The night before our meeting, the man who had raised me finally came home. He looked like he had aged years in the week he had been gone. His clothes were wrinkled, his face was unshaven, and his eyes were red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. He sat down at the kitchen table across from my mother and me and just stared at us for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Smaller somehow. He said he had been thinking about everything, about the test results, about the things he had said and done over the years. He said he knew he had been cruel to me, but that he had convinced himself it was justified because he believed I wasn't really his son. Now that he knew for certain that I wasn't his biological child, he said, he didn't know how to feel or what to do. Part of him felt vindicated, like his instincts had been right all along. But another part of him felt ashamed about how he had treated a child who had never done anything wrong except exist. He said he thought it would be best if he moved out, at least temporarily. He would make sure my mother and I were financially supported, but he needed time to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, we could have going forward. I should have felt relieved. This was what I had wanted for years, freedom from his constant criticism and cruelty. But instead, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, but also sadness and a strange kind of loss. He had been the only father I had ever known, even if he had been a terrible one. The next day, I drove to meet my biological father. I recognized him immediately when I walked into the coffee shop, even though I had only seen pictures. The family resemblance was unmistakable. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Then he did something that surprised me completely. He started crying. He said he was sorry. Sorry for not knowing about me. Sorry for not being there. Sorry for all the years I had spent feeling unwanted and unloved. He said that if he had known, everything would have been different. We spent 4 hours together that day. He told me about my half-siblings, showed me pictures, talked about family traditions and inside jokes I had never been part of. He asked if I would be interested in meeting them and becoming part of their family in whatever way felt comfortable for everyone involved. For the first time in my life, someone was actively wanting me to be part of their family rather than making me feel like I had to earn my place or apologize for existing. Over the following weeks, I began building a relationship with my biological father and his family. It wasn't without complications. His wife had mixed feelings about suddenly having a teenage stepson, and my half-siblings needed time to adjust to the idea of having a brother they had never known about. But everyone was trying, and that effort meant everything to me. I also started having regular conversations with my mother about our family history and her choices over the years. I began to understand that she had been as much a victim of the man who raised me as I had been, just in different ways. We started going to counseling together, trying to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of secrets. The man who had raised me moved into an apartment across town. We had dinner together once, about a month after he left. It was awkward and difficult, but he apologized for the way he had treated me over the years. He said he knew his behavior hadn't been about me, that it had been about his own insecurities and need for control. I told him I accepted his apology, but that I needed time to figure out if I wanted him to be part of my life going forward. The damage he had done wasn't going to be undone by a single conversation, no matter how sincere his regret seemed to be. That was 6 months ago. I'm now 18, about to graduate high school and getting ready to start college in the fall. My biological father has offered to help with tuition costs, and I'm planning to spend part of the summer getting to know my half-siblings better. I still avoid mirrors sometimes, still hear that cruel voice in my head telling me I'm a mistake or an aberration. 17 years of psychological conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. But now I have other voices to balance it out. I have people who look at me and see potential instead of problems, who treat me like someone worth knowing instead of someone to be tolerated. The strangest part of this whole experience has been realizing that the man who raised me was right about one thing. I never was his son. But he was wrong about what that meant. Being his son would have meant inheriting his cruelty, his need to control and diminish others, his inability to love without conditions. Instead, I got to be someone else's son. Someone who wanted me, who was proud of me, who saw my existence as a gift rather than a burden. I got to discover that there was nothing fundamentally wrong with me, that I had just been growing up in the wrong soil. I'm not a mistake. I never was. I was just a secret waiting to be discovered, a missing piece of a puzzle that finally found where it belonged. The mirror in my childhood bathroom is still there, but it doesn't hold the same power over me anymore. When I look in it now, I see my biological father's eyes, my mother's smile, and my own unique combination of features that make me who I am. I see someone who belongs somewhere, someone who is wanted, someone who has value just by existing. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I had never ordered that DNA test, if I had just accepted his version of reality and spent the rest of my life believing I was a genetic disappointment. The thought makes me incredibly grateful for that moment of courage, for the decision to seek truth instead of continuing to live with uncertainty and shame. I'm starting college in 3 months with a major in biology, partly because of my fascination with genetics and DNA, but mostly because I want to understand the science behind identity and inheritance. I want to help other people discover their own truths, their own stories, their own sense of belonging in the world. The man who raised me still lives across town. We exchange Christmas cards now, and sometimes we run into each other at the grocery store where I still work part-time. The conversations are polite but distant. I think we both understand that too much damage was done for us to have a normal father-son relationship, but we found a way to coexist peacefully. My mother has started dating someone new, a man who treats her with kindness and respect. She seems lighter somehow, like she's finally free from the weight of carrying secrets and walking on eggshells. Watching her happiness has helped me understand that leaving that toxic situation was the right choice for all of us. My biological father and I talk on the phone every week now. He comes to my high school graduation next month, and I'm spending 2 weeks with his family this summer before college starts. It's not a replacement for the childhood we missed together, but it's a beginning. The most important thing I've learned through all of this is that family isn't just about genetics or legal relationships. It's about choosing to love and support each other, about creating environments where people can grow and thrive instead of just survive. I spent 17 years in a house where I was made to feel like my very existence was a problem that needed to be solved. Now I'm surrounded by people who see my existence as something to be celebrated. The difference has been transformative in ways I'm still discovering every day. That DNA test didn't just reveal the truth about my paternity. It revealed the truth about what I deserved, what I was worth, and what real love looks like. It showed me that I had been carrying shame that was never mine to carry, that I had been trying to earn something that should have been given freely. I'm not the mistake he said I was. I'm not the accident he made me feel like. I'm someone's son, someone's brother, someone's family member who is welcomed and wanted and loved. And that changes everything.